When I first started practicing Buddhism, when I sat on the cushion, adopted the noble posture of the Buddha, brought my focus to my breath and began investigating my mind, I wasn't happy with what I found there. To be frank, my thoughts were filled with anger, despair, fear. At one point, I honestly thought there might be something wrong with me, so much so that I went to my teacher with my concerns. He assured me that what I was experiencing was normal, and that if I was truly concerned about what I was finding in my investigations of my mind, the best thing I could do was to go back to my cushion. So I did that, and I've been sitting for the last 10 years, and while I can say this practice is healthy, life-affirming, and I have every intention on doing it for the rest of my life, I can also say that there are still days when I sit on the cushion, adopt the noble posture of the Buddha, and still do not like what I find. There are still days where there's fear, where there's anger, where there's sadness. So why is that? Why is it so hard to rid our minds of defilement? Why is it necessary to do this practice not just once, not just twice, not just 10,000 times, but rather for the entirety of our lives in the same way that the Buddha did 2,600 years ago? Well, to understand this, we first need to understand where the defilements of greed, anger, and ignorance come from. And to understand that, it's useful to think of our minds as a garden. So, when a gardener picks a plot of land to grow their fruits and their vegetables, the first thing they have to do is to prepare the soil. So they'll till it to get rid of any weeds that are on the surface. Then they'll add fertilizer and compost to build up the soil. And finally, they'll plant their seeds. Let's say it's tomatoes. And over time, with water and with sunlight, those tomato plants will start to grow and bloom. And the gardener will be very excited until they look closely and realize that there are also a copious amount of weeds also growing in their tomato beds. Why is that? One might think that we got rid of all the weeds during the tilling process, during the process of preparing the soil. But that is not the case. It turns out that soil, much like the mind, can be tricky. That there are seeds planted just below the surface, the seeds we don't know anything about, that don't ripen, they don't grow until they're exposed to oxygen and heat. Thus, the same process, that turning over of the soil, the tilling, that allows us to plant our fruits and vegetables, it also causes the defilements, the weeds, to grow in our garden. We cannot grow vegetables without also dealing with the weeds. So, what does the gardener do? Well, they go out every day and they pull the weeds wherever they see them, and they nurture their tomato plants. They continue adding fertilizer and compost and mulch so that the tomato plants grow up big and strong, and they continue pulling the weeds and pulling the weeds. And then they think they've got it all, and they see more weeds, and they pull those as well. And what happens is that even though the weeds never go away entirely, they're never able to take over that plot of land again. The tomato plants, however, which have been nurtured and cared for, grow up big and strong. And the gardener is able to gather their fruit to feed themselves and their family. Our minds work in exactly the same way. There are countless seeds planted in our subconscious, not just from this life and experiences we've had, but from experiences, from karma that we've accumulated from the infinite number of lives we've lived in the past. Some of those seeds are on the surface and they're obvious to see and deal with. Some of them don't make an appearance until we turn over the soil of our minds. Thus, the same process that allows us to grow the fruit of equanimity, compassion, sympathetic joy, and loving kindness, I'm referring to the 4 Brahma Viharas, that same practice also causes weeds, causes the defilements of greed, anger, and ignorance to also come to the surface. We had no idea they were there before, but now we see them clearly. So we have 2 choices. We are the gardener. We can give up and allow the weeds to take back over, or we can go about the hard work of nurturing the fruits and vegetables of Dharma while simultaneously pulling the weeds, the defilements of greed, anger, and ignorance from our mind every time, every place we see them. This is a lifetime practice. In the same way that you can't have a garden without weeds, you can't have a mind without defilements, at least not until you realize Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, full and complete awakening. Until then, we should not be scared or depressed by the defilements in our mind. Rather, we should be excited. Those seeds have finally ripened, and now we can do something about them. Now we can yank them out by the roots so that the fruits of Dharma can grow in our mind. And as those fruits grow through our daily practice of chanting, meditation, prostrating, and sutra studying, we are better able to see our Buddha nature, to realize our enlightenment and manifest it in the world in the same way that a gardener is able to grow tomatoes and share the fruits of their labor with everyone they love. Amitabha.